Starting off on this project, I am working on black Canson Mi-Teintes paper. This one, it's the smooth side of the paper. It's typically, I think, used for pastels, but the smooth side, as it turns out, is wonderful for colored pencil. I'm really, the more I use the texture on this, the more I like it. So what I've done is I took a light gray polychromos pencil and I traced everything out, and I used a projector to get my image onto this. With the black paper, this is one where I think tracing and transfer paper I would be fairly happy with using a lighter transfer paper for this, whereas I don't like to do that on white paper because you can never really get rid of those lines. But I think with the black paper, the way that it works, I would be perfectly happy with having those heavier white lines because they're so easy to cover on this. So that would be one tip if you don't want to draw straight out onto the paper, and I don't really recommend drawing straight out onto the paper because you can't easily erase things on it. While stuff erases, if you look at the eye that's on the dark section or the dark portion, look at the smudges there. That was after me erasing lines that I decided I didn't quite want on there. On this reference photo, the eye on the right is being hit by light, the eye on the left is in the shadow, and so the eye on the left, it was huge in comparison to the other. And so when I traced it out the same as it was on the photo, I just didn't like how that looked for my work. So I decided I wanted just the hint of an eye, but I wanted mostly everything to be very black on that side. So I had tried to erase it. And you can see there where it's kind of smudgy, it doesn't erase completely. So I wouldn't do a lot of drawing and erasing directly to the paper. I would draw everything out on a separate piece of paper and use either tracing and transfer paper or use a projector like I did here. So I'm going through, I'm using the light colors first. Now I can darken up all of these colors very easily. A lot of this needs to be a darker cream color, but if I jump into using that darker, kind of an orangey color right now, it doesn't show up that great against the black of the paper. So if I put the lighter creams and whites down first, I can take the lighter colors on top and they show up, or not lighter, but the oranges and creams, those show up much better. Or tans. I'm mixing up all my words. I'm hoping you guys can read my mind at this point. But I'm going to mix the oranges and tans on top of those creams and white colors, and it showed up really well. Now, I'm never able to get white as bright as it would be on white paper. White paper, that's as bright as you're going to get, and you can't do that here unless you use the touch-up texture titanium white that you'll see me use later on. That basically solves the problem that I had with using white or black paper before, where I could never get my whites light enough. Well, I can now with using that product. But with the pencils alone, you'll get it to where they seem very light just because of the contrast between that and the black of the paper, but they will never be as bright, and none of your colors really are ever going to be quite as clean and bright as they would be on white paper. So it's just something to keep in mind. So for me, when using the black paper, while I like it, I should specify that I like it for specific projects, like here where the owl, half of his face was in a deep shadow. The tiger that I drew, half of the tiger's face was in a deep shadow. And I really like that look with the black paper. But if I were doing, let's say, oh, I don't know, a sunset or something like that, I probably wouldn't start with the black paper. That wouldn't be my ideal choice because it's really hard to get your bright oranges super bright or your bright yellows super bright. And I found that out when working on the eye. And while I did find a solution to that with using the touch-up texture titanium white, that was for a small area. On a large thing where I want a lot of bright fluffy clouds and that sort of thing, I don't think black would be my go-to paper. But the tooth of this paper is really nice, and I feel like I can get things done a lot faster here than on some other papers because the pencil sticks to it so well. You get so much pigment on the paper very quickly. Another thing that does make this go a lot faster than if I had drawn the same thing on white is I'm letting the black of the paper work for me. And in choosing a project like this owl, by the way, which came from wildlifereferencephotos.com, so if you want to draw this specific owl, you can pick that photo up over there. But with this one, it's got a lot of black. I mean, that to me is going to be the best use for using black paper. So letting that work for me created a lot less work for myself. So I was able to get this project done much faster than I would the same size on white paper, even if I were to leave the background white, just because of how I was able to let the black work for me. Now what I'm using here, it's going to look very chalky just for the first few layers. Once I blend out with the paint thinner and the odorless mineral spirits or paint thinner, that works just fine on this paper. That really does create a very nice smooth look. And you can kind of create a base like that, a lighter base, by putting the white down, blend out with your odorless mineral spirits, and then you can put other colors on top, which will allow those other colors to be brighter. So here is a tan color that normally is a very light color, and you can see how dark it looks on this paper up against the black. So if I need that to be really bright, then I want to put the whites and the creams down first, blend it, and then put this color on top. And all of the colors that I'm using, they're basically just the majority of the tans, browns, creams, and oranges that I own, along with a couple of grays. But I wasn't super concerned about which color I used. I basically look at my pencils and go, okay, I need a brownish tone, and just grab one. It wasn't super concerning to me that it would be the exact right brown. I was worried more about getting the right values here. That's really what's going to make the biggest difference in this piece. And that edge of the owl, you can see how much that does look like almost if you had used chalk on a blackboard. That's really the look that you have there, and that's okay for your first layer. And what I'm doing in these earlier stages is really just blocking in color, figuring out where my general lights and darks go. That's what matters to me at this point. And here's another color. That same color on white paper is a much lighter, kind of a pumpkin orange color. Look how toned down that is to where it's more of a gold brown type color here. So the colors that you get will be very, very different on black paper than it will be on white paper. You may want to have a scratch piece next to you that you can test things out on. And to start with, going up against the black of the paper, everything feels like you're too light, when in fact you're probably not light enough. It's the very, very opposite of how it feels when you're working on white paper and everything feels too dark to begin with. Here, everything feels much lighter than it really is. So at this point, that area I'm working on right now was starting to feel extra light. But once I blocked everything in, I realized I have to go a lot lighter than that still. Now throughout this piece, I am not terribly worried about every line being exact to the reference photo. It really doesn't matter. What matters is that the beak is in the right place, the eyes are in the right place, the tuft of feathers that come out from the head, those are in the right place. The white line around the edge of the face, that needs to be in the right place. But the individual feathers, individual little black dots and little tiny details, those are really not a huge deal. You want to make sure that the feathers are about the right length, that they're about the right size, going in the right direction. Those things matter, but making sure, I mean, I'm not counting going, okay, there's 15 feathers going across here and then 4 going across here. That does not really matter. I just want to capture the general feel for how many feathers are there, which direction they're going, that sort of thing. When working in color or on a white paper, I typically like my my polychromos black better than my luminance black. But on the black paper, more often than not, I like the luminance. The luminance is a much more opaque. It just, I don't know why, it seems to show up better. I get a better better coverage than what I'm getting with the black with the polychromos. The black polychromos is actually not dark enough, which is odd because on white paper I feel almost exactly the opposite. But the Luminance black I really, really like on this paper. I saved my polychromos black for the tiniest details where I needed the pencil to be a little bit sharper. And at this point, I just really want to get a lot of pigment on the paper so that when I blend out, I can get rid of a bunch of those little black dots of the paper showing through. This paper is a bit more forgiving than when I work on, let's say, Fabriano Artistico. This one, my brush strokes or my pencil strokes don't seem to show up as much in the end when I don't want them to. So if I'm being a little bit lazy in how I apply the pencils, I'm not working in really smooth ovals, that doesn't seem to matter as much on this as it does on the Fabriano Artistico. The Fabriano, it's pretty obvious when I got lazy. And which paper I choose for which project, it really just depends on the project itself. It's not like I can say, okay, this paper or that paper is always better than the other. It depends on what I'm doing. If I'm going to be airbrushing anything, Fabriano is my favorite. If I'm going to be getting tiny, tiny fine detail, Fabriano I really like better. But for quick coverage and for something like this, especially where I've got so much black that I want to show anyway, this one is a very nice paper. But I don't think I can sit and say one is better than the other. It just depends on what you're doing. More often than not, I would likely choose the Fabriano Artistico or a lighter Stonehenge. I really would only want the black for a few select projects, but the tooth of this paper I like so much that I do need to pick up. I keep forgetting to order it, but I need to, next time I place an order, get some white to see how it stands up that way for projects. I've used a light blue color by this same brand, the Canson Mi-Teintes, and that I really liked as well. But it's just got a really nice tooth that the pencil sticks to very easily, and I didn't really have any problem layering or blending with the paint thinners you'll see here. Now with the paint thinner, as I blend this out, look how it'll make the colors almost translucent, so it'll seem like I don't have much on there. When it dries, it'll be more opaque again. I'm using a small, this is a Taklon bristled flat brush, just for these little areas. And I'm moving the brush in a way that's very sketchy, so if I have lines that show through, that they are the sketchy lines that would work with the feathers. I want to make sure they're going, the brush is moving in the right direction for those feathers, so any streaks just work with me instead of against me. The downside of so many real-time clips is every time I pause to sharpen video, we sit here and watch nothing. Super exciting. So as I move this brush, see how I'm moving the brush in the direction that I would want any feather streaks. If they show, it's in that direction. Now this brush is actually a scrubby or scrubber brush, typically used with watercolor. It's usually located with watercolor brushes. It's very stiff, very short bristles. Sometimes I like this brush for base layers. I'm not sure that I loved it for this project. I just wanted to test it out. The thing with those brushes is that they absorb so much paint thinner, so you end up really oversaturating the paper with paint thinner. It doesn't damage anything, it just takes a lot longer to dry. So this gives me a fairly decent base to build off of. I've covered the grain. You can still see some of the black of the paper showing through, but look how smooth that is. I've gotten rid of the majority of the grainy gritty feel, so the pencil marks that I put on top of that will be fairly smooth. And it was done really, really quickly. Now you can see the black of the paper showing through, so it's not going to be nearly as bright as it would on white paper, but I do like how quickly I was able to get that much coverage. Now here I'm using my Luminance pencils because these are going to be more opaque for my base on the eye, and it still wasn't nearly as bright as I would have liked it to be at this point. My reference photo did not have a shine on the eye. I ended up adding that so that the eye didn't feel so flat. Without the shine, it looks like a flat surface. If I can put a little bit of a shine, it'll round it off. So I did add a little bit of one, even though that was not on the reference photo. For the pupil of the eye, that is black now, and I'll add black on top of that. I'm then going to add a dark, dark blue, a sort of indigo blue, on top of the black so that it's not just flat black there. And that will end up blending in with the white that I blend for the curve of the eye or the shine of the eye. It gave me a really nice glassy look because of the blue that I put for the pupil blending in with that. So adding a lighter color here around this eye. Now in the reference photo, this had almost a slight green tint around it, but the thing is when you blend a yellowish color over black, you're gonna get a greenish tint anyway. So I just let the black of the paper work with me to create that tone around the pupil. Using a brighter orange-red type color there. I'll be putting the little black lines for the hairs over portion of the eye, but I want to get the majority of the eye shaded in first. Blending that out, and that's going to take a couple of layers to brighten up enough. And even here, it felt like it was super bright to me until I got the rest of the feathers, and then that's when it started to really bother me that wasn't as bright as I would like, and where I came on top with the touch-up texture titanium white and then color on top of that to brighten it up. But that will be at the end of the video. I'm jumping ahead of myself. I'm going to take, this is a light, believe it's a pale, pale gray. I'm going back and forth between the Luminance and the polychromos here and just sketching in the lightest feathers. I will tint the color for those later on. I just need to get something light blocked in first. I had a great question during the live stream when I was working on this. Somebody had said that they had purchased the Luminance white, but it wasn't opaque. It wasn't completely opaque. She couldn't get it to come out completely white on top of other colors. You want to remember when using colored pencils, all of them, even the most opaque, which I find to be the Luminance and the Derwent Drawing Chinese White, those are extremely opaque. They're not going to ever get your paper. If you're working on white paper, you'll never pull it back up to completely white. Or if I put that pencil on one of these, I'm never going to be 100% back to totally white. Those pencils will lighten an area quite a bit, but it's not going to be completely white. If you want an area to be completely white, you want to either work on white paper and leave the white of the paper showing through for those white points, or you can use like what I do here, which you'll see later on, that touch-up texture titanium white allows you to pull things back up to completely white. But the white pencils, even the most opaque, they're not completely opaque. It's not the same as, say, when you're painting and using a titanium white that will be really opaque and completely cover whatever's under it. With pencils, it's not going to be anywhere near that opaque. You will lighten it, but it won't go back to totally white. So you want to plan for that. Again, if you're working on white paper, the plan there, if you're not using something like the touch-up texture titanium white, you just want to let the paper, the white of the paper, show through. And one of the things that I always liked to do before I started using this method now for the white, I would take my wax-based white pencil, so either the Luminance, or before I was using Luminance, I would use the Prismacolor. Let's say it was a whisker. I would color everything in or shade, push really hard with that pencil, get it as sharp as I can, not so sharp with Prismacolor as we all know, but I would sharpen that pencil and push fairly hard and really get the pigment, the white of that pencil on the paper, and it sort of protected it. So when I blended around it, as I was drawing things around that area, it didn't go too dark. It wouldn't stay 100% white, but by protecting the paper a bit with that white pencil, first for a whisker or any hairs, that really did help me to keep certain areas lighter so I didn't accidentally cover it too much with the dark fur color or whatever was next to it. So that's another way that you can help keep the paper white. You can use masking fluid. I do know of some colored pencil artists who use that. For me, I don't love it because I tend to lift the masking fluid, just how I work with a pencil. I end up creating more trouble than it's work unless I'm airbrushing a background. That is the one time I use it. But for keeping areas white, I do know some colored pencil artists will be very careful and use masking fluid to block out areas they want to stay white. But most are just very, very careful to let the white of the paper stay white. Now, this is the white Luminance, and this now appears to be really white on top of the color I previously put down. When I first put white against the black of the paper, it did not seem this bright. And this white, as much as it appears to be as white would be, it's not. When you put a white paper next to it, it's very, very obvious that it's not the same. Here I'm starting to sketch in some of the little feathers. This reference photo, this side of the owl was very out of focus, and I am putting more detail in mine just because I've drawn enough owls. I know how those feathers kind of crisscross back and forth. I am putting more detail than what was in the photo there. One of the questions we're so often asked when we work in realism is, what's the point? Just take a photo. There's already a photo. What's the point in recreating it? Well, in this case, I'm taking things that I loved about the photo and adjusting things that I did not love about the photo and kind of combining those together to make something that I hope is an improvement on it or is more what I'm looking for. So this is one of many examples on what the point is of painting in realism. I think it's something that so many of us have to deal with that question all the time. But this would be one example. Another example would be somebody who has not the greatest pet portrait or photo of their pet. I had a lady a while back. She had taken a photo of the dog. I could see enough detail, but the photo was slightly blurred, enough so that I can see why she didn't want a huge print made of it. So she had me paint it where I was able to clean up those edges. The angle of the dog, the lighting, everything was beautiful. It was just slightly out of focus and good enough for me to work from, and it created a beautiful painting. If I had not taught myself, if I had not learned how to paint very realistically, I could not provide the work that that customer had wanted. There are just so many reasons. People are always asking us that. What's the point? It's not real art if you're just copying a photo. No, it really is. You're hopefully improving on that photo, changing things to more what you're looking for. Some little details in there with that black pencil. And so here I'm using my polychromos. It gives me really fine, sharp details and lines. And that luminance does still show up quite well. So even if you're not going to use the titanium white touch-up texture mixture that I'll use later on to brighten stuff up even more, you can still create a beautiful piece just with your luminance and your polychromos pencils. I should end that with on this paper. Obviously you can create beautiful pieces with that, but the brightness that I'm going to get, it would still be pretty even without, even if it isn't as sharp. You can see how nicely that pencil shows up right on top of what I previously did. And I don't feel like I have to blend things out quite as much. My end result ends up being very smooth on this paper. I don't have a good explanation for that, but I didn't feel the need to use my odorless mineral spirits anywhere near as much. And if I had a paper that if I could not use odorless mineral spirits, if I had to complete something without, this would probably be the paper I would do that with, because it didn't feel as hard on my hand. As much as I was not blending with the odorless mineral spirits, I didn't have the pressure or the pain that I typically get in the arthritis in that hand, even though I was working how I used to work before I found odorless mineral spirits, where I was doing a little bit more with the burnishing, pushing a little bit harder for some of these later layers. But this paper, it didn't take as many layers to get that look, so it wasn't quite as harsh. So again, if I didn't want to use odorless mineral spirits, I do think that the Canson Mi-Teintes would be the paper I would use. And obviously it works fine with the odorless mineral spirits, but it blended really well without as well. Now for these little lines that I'm doing in here, I'm not terribly worried that they are exact to the reference photo, in addition to the fact that I actually added lines that weren't in the reference photo. I added more detail there, but they didn't need to be exact. They need to go in about the right direction, and that's it. Now here, for portions of this outer edge, I did use the colorless blender, the one from Caran that comes with the Luminance pencils. It was okay. It gives you a definite white wax that shows up on the paper. So it didn't really work where I was trying to blend things out smoothly up against between the color and the black of the paper. I got a very definite grayish finish that stayed. It had some well, it was more opaque than I would have expected a colorless blender to be, I guess. It does blend okay. It blended better on this paper than I had found when I tried to use that on Fabriano Artistico. I think it's because of how soft this paper is. Normally, those colorless blenders from Caran I don't use. I don't find them to be useful at all, but they weren't terrible on this paper. And the techniques that I'm using here, you can do this on white paper too. You're just going to be using your black pencil a lot more to fill in the black areas. Now, if you want your black, this paper has a semi-dull finish to it. I do find if I want a really rich black, that's going to come from the pencils themselves. I do like the results I get with that. It's a deeper black. It seems to have more depth, where this is going to be a much more flat, soft, kind of matte finish. You can see these little kind of back and forth. They're not just scribbles. I don't want to make a sort of chevron pattern back and forth on those lines on the forehead. Those are individual lines. I want to lift the pencil in between each of those sketchy lines. Some of them are connected, so it ends up forming a bit of that chevron pattern, that zigzag kind of pattern. But for the most part, I want to make sure that those lines are just straight individual lines that overlap, not just zigzags back and forth. You don't want to create too much of a pattern with that. I'm not pushing very hard here. I'm just taking this gray and lightly going over the black where I want a shadow in there, but I don't want it to be the deep, deep black yet, because I want to be able to come back through with black and put detail on top with that pencil. But I've got to get it a little bit lighter before I can create that look. I'm using a Taklon bristled filbert brush here and just lightly going over the blending there. Now that that area is dry, I can come back through with my black pencil over some of those grays for the deeper shadows within those feathers. important for the beak. Remember when you're painting and drawing close-ups of birds like this, don't just draw in the beak solid black, solid gray. You're going to have a lot of variation, not just from the shadows like I have here, but normally on a bird like we've talked about that with the macaw, you'll get ridges in those beaks. Pay close attention to where your lights and your darks are. Watch that reference photo. Don't just assume it's a beak, it's gray, or it's a beak, it's black. Really watch the ridges and detailing there. It'll make your work look so much more realistic. A beak that's too smooth doesn't always look so great. I remember years ago, I had done an owl and my friend commenting, he's like, it looks like a photograph, except for the beak. And the beak actually had shading there, but it looked a little bit too smooth. It didn't have the same amount of detailing as everywhere else. Make sure you don't skip over that. So here I can come back on top now with some of these orange and tan colors over the creams, and they show up so much better than if I had just used that color straight onto the black of the paper. Just working that pencil back and forth, hitting mostly the tops of some of these feathers. If I had not planned on using the titanium white colored pencil touch-up, no, wait, that didn't come out right, touch-up texture titanium white mixture, I would have spent a bit more time perfecting those feathers at this stage. So if you're not going to use that, take your time here, and when you get to this stage on whatever owl that you're working on, even if it's an, let's say, a great horned owl, it doesn't have to be this photo, this would be the stage where I would start putting the tighter detail in those little feathers on the head. For me here, though, I'm going to wait till the end when I use that other product. You want your pencil to be very sharp when you're getting these ends, and if your pencil isn't sharp enough, you can use a piece of sandpaper and just twist the pencil there so you don't have to constantly sharpen it with the sharpener. You can twist that onto a piece of sandpaper to sharpen just the tip of whatever lead you have out. So let's say in a case like this with this pencil, that pencil has a decent amount of lead, so it seems kind of wasteful to just jump into sharpening it constantly. You can use a piece of sandpaper to help sharpen that up just a bit without having to use the sharpener. Thinking a brighter orange now in the eye, but it's still not getting as bright as I'm going to want in the end. Switching to the polychromos there for the finer detail in that eye. That one being brown, it's going to be more translucent, but it's a darker color, so it should show up just fine over the orange that I currently have. I'm taking this brown and tinting the color of those lighter areas I previously had in there. So this is working a lot like a glaze in oil paint. When working on something where you've got this much detail, I definitely recommend break it down into zones or little sections. Don't try to do the whole body, the whole face and body, everything all together where you're jumping around too much. Now, I do jump around a lot, but I really focus on smaller areas as I do that. A lot of times when I'm jumping around, it's because I'm waiting for one area to dry if I've blended with odorless mineral spirits. But if you jump around too much, I think you end up kind of losing sight of what you're doing. So I try to get, in this case, the face, the forehead, and the feathers that are sticking out, getting those done and focusing on those before I moved on to the body. It makes it much, much easier to tackle. And of course, I'll come back and do more details on the face once I get the feathers of the body in, but I want to get them mostly done before I move on. And watch how those feathers curve. They're not just all straight lines going all the way up the forehead. You're going to flatten it out if you do that. Really watch the shape there. And so here I've got a very, very sharp pencil and just going in between, creating the jagged edges. This is that ivory pencil from Faber-Castell. That one actually shows up fairly well over this as well. And these highlights, even though they're going to be a bit brighter than I want for a lot of this, it's okay because now I'll be able to take colors like the oranges and browns that weren't showing up really well and put that on top of this. This pastel paper is available in so many different colors. So you may want to try it if black seems a little bit intimidating because it is a lot harder to get your colors to really show up, and they don't ever get as bright as they can on white. Some of the lighter blues and other pale colors, you may want to try those as well because you're still going to be a lot brighter on those than you will on black. I think the trick with working on black, and I mentioned this earlier, was just choosing the right project. I don't think every project is ideal for this paper. Now I can come on top of this with this brighter orange and look how nicely this shows up. Whereas when I use the same color on the paper straight, you can't really see it very well. It's just kind of a darker brown. I'm hitting these highlights. I'm not just making white through everything. I really want that to focus more on the tops of a lot of these feathers. I think that's a mistake that a lot of artists make when they're trying to create something that's very realistic and they're adding a lot of detail. Make sure you pay attention to where that detail goes. So here, yeah, I can put just random white lines everywhere. I know I need to use white. I know I need white lines. That doesn't mean that I need white lines evenly spread everywhere. That makes everything look very not so realistic. So watch the way that you clump and cluster your highlights. That makes a very, very big difference. There's a piece that I've got in my critique submissions of white tigers, and they're beautifully painted, but they don't look real. They're not capturing what that artist's goal was. And really the main problem there was that that same white stroke that she used for the tiger's fur was used on everything, evenly, everywhere. There's no variation there, and that's really what is making the difference on what are otherwise very, very nicely painted tigers. The detailing is there. It's just not the right detail. Watch your clumps and clusters. Now here for the eye, I'm not going exactly by the reference photo. I want to create the hint of an eye because while I originally planned on leaving this whole side just straight black, the more I looked at it, I decided I did want a hint of detailing in there. So I'm creating just the hint of the outside of that eye there. And I'll do a little bit more on that. but I'm not going by that reference photo because that eye is so much bigger than the other one on that photo, and it just kind of looked, I thought it would look very weird in the artwork, so I didn't want to go just by that. It looked like I drew it wrong. And I actually opened up my eye on the right hand side a little bit more than it was in the reference photo too, so that is one other difference that I did there. So here, just back into blocking in the general shapes of these feathers as I move on. Again, you can see how I'm, for the most part, for these lighter areas, adding the white first, then tinting that color with the tans and browns. Using the black over some of that because of the detail that I have on the left hand side. Even later on, I'm going to tone a lot of that down to where it's barely a hint of anything there. Even now, it's a lot brighter than what I'm going to want in the end. So just blocking all of these in. I don't need them to be perfect. I just need to get them fairly light so that I can put the color on top that I actually want. Blending that out with paint thinner. I'm using another flat brush there so that I can create more streaks and have them going in the right direction. And not smudge over all the black. It gave me a bit more control of my filbert that I typically use. That one is a little bit too large, so I had switched to these smaller flat ones for some of this. This area here will have a lot more detail later on. This paper takes lots of layers very, very well. And it's not a super thick paper, it just has a very nice amount of tooth to it. At this point, I'm not super worried about all of my colors being exactly right, which I never really am, but here especially not a big deal. What I want is just to create the general light shapes. I'm going to correct all of this, adjust my colors later on after I blend. My main concern at this point is getting pigment on the paper so I can get rid of that grainy gritty look, and then I will come on top with the colors that I really want that are going to matter more for those last layers later on. But this is definitely not a stress about the colors being perfect stage. For the area of these feathers that are more of a light cream kind of white color, this area here is going to be in shadow, so I'm shading that in with the gray now, and I'll darken that up later, but just to get my base there, I'm using a gray for the shaded areas. Now, once you get a couple of layers where you have blended out with a paint thinner, look how much darker this seems to go, and it'll be more obvious later on, but it seems to make it super, super dark. It's almost like you're erasing the pencil instead of blending it out. Once it dries, it'll lighten back up. And I'm not worried about this blending too far into the black. I can come back on top with my Luminance or the polychromos black and cover it back up. You really can't tell where I've done that. This is going to create very soft looking feathers, just getting this nice soft base. And that's the thing you really got to watch when you're working in colored pencil and you're drawing fur or feathers. You really need to watch that you keep them looking soft. You can see as it dried there, look how bright that got once that was dry. You want that to be very soft though. Don't try to put so much detail that everything starts coming out like plastic or clay. That's something that we see a lot. Especially, I've seen it where artists are super amazing with portraits. The skin's amazing, but once they get to the hair and fur and feathers, everything's very clay or very plastic-like. Watch for that. Make sure that you're creating softness. Let your colors, your pencil strokes overlap and blend where they need to so that everything's not too harsh. You want detail, but you want detail in the right place. Watch that you don't have every single line, every single thing super sharp, super harsh edges, because that's really what creates that very plasticky clay type look. Here I'm starting to break up those feathers again, those clumps and clusters. Watch too that all of your pencil strokes, you don't want all of your lines super, super straight. That won't look very natural. Mine are mostly slightly curved, and it's something that I don't even think about as I'm doing it. That's just how my hand moves now because I've been intentionally doing that way for so long. But watch that. Watch that your lines aren't all super straight. That gives it a very stiff feel. Just building that base, layering, and here really look how dark that gets when I blend out with the paint thinner. It's like each additional layer, it seems like it gets darker and darker when I add the paint thinner, but it'll dry up very light again. You can see how opaque that is once that's dry. And it just takes a few minutes. Coming back through now with that black polychromos and better defining some of the details and edging here. And here we have a very messy look for a lot of these feathers. They're not clean, they're not sharp. That's going to come, and you'll see this in a few minutes very easily once I skip through, because the portion that's on the live stream, I'm just going to link you guys to that. I don't have it sped up or included here, but you'll see where it kind of jumps from what I was working on with in that live stream, where all of a sudden, look how much cleaner and how much tighter the detailing is going to get on those feathers. It really, just spending the extra time and just keep fiddling with them, keep messing with those little details until it starts to look right. And I like to set little goals for myself as I work. Like on this night, this was before the live stream, I wanted to have most of the body blocked in. The night before, I wanted most of the head blocked in. I set those goals, and it makes it a lot easier for me to focus on those zones and just to know I'm not having to work on the whole body at once, or the expectation of I just want to get as much done as possible. I like to set those goals, and I'll work until I hit those goals, but it seems to make it a little bit easier to manage than having the outlook of I need to get everything done all at once. if that makes any sense at all. Little mind games I play with myself as I'm working. And I find there are times where I'm working on a lot of little detail where I'll start to get very antsy. I don't want to sit still. I'll be listening to a book, which would normally keep me busy or occupied so that I'll sit still longer, and that won't. You just feel like anxious. I want to get up and go do something else. I don't want to work on this right now. Try something else. If the book, which normally works for me, sometimes it won't. Sometimes I'll still want to get up. Sometimes watching videos on YouTube will be better. I'll put my phone underneath the easel and have videos going of random anything while I'm working. Sometimes that will help. If that doesn't work, then I'll try music instead. But if one of your usuals, you still feel antsy, you still feel like you don't want to sit still, try something else. For me, that's what I generally rotate between are YouTube videos, audiobooks. Audiobooks are my first choice. YouTube videos, music, and if I still can't find anything that's keeping me still, I will look for something to put on YouTube in the background, put it on the laptop off to the side. So here I'm coming through with that black luminance and really darkening up some of this, so it fades out nicely. And I'm basically doing it as a glaze. I don't need to blend anything or worry about anything there. I'm just toning all of that down. Still keeping these sketchy lines and letting them overlap and clump together. Not random confetti lines. Look how they cluster and group. What I was doing there is holding the pencil up so that I make sure that the eye is the same height on both sides. You get an illusion when you've got one super dark like this and one light, and I just wanted to make sure the top was about the same on both sides. So just taking that pencil and holding it up so straight across let me know. Okay, so here we're jumping ahead. This is after the live stream. So I've got 2 hours of messing around with this on there where I'm working pretty slow because of it being the live stream and I'm chatting. But this is the stage that makes such a difference. Taking the mixture of titanium white and touch-up texture from brushandpencil.com, and I will put a link to that in the description, assuming I have any memory when I upload this. But with this one, I'm using a liner brush. This one is a number 2. I typically like a number 1 better. This is a synthetic hog hair bristled liner brush. They are the generic ones from Hobby Lobby. I love these brushes. And I'm just lining in a lot of these highlights. Now I'm intentionally going to let this go lighter than it needs to be so that I can come back on top with darker colors. I still keep the detail of the lines, but I can tone them down and put, let's say I want something to be a brighter orange than what would show up on anything I have here. That's really going to show up well over this. The touch-up texture adds tooth to your paper. So if you burnished an area too much, you can add just the straight touch-up texture and you'll be able to put colored pencil on top of it and it'll stick better. Here, I'm mixing it with the white and painting on the highlights. And now areas, I mean, you look at the side of the face, that white on the outside edge of that black line. That appeared to be pretty white before. A lot of these feathers appeared to be very bright. Well, when you put actual white up against it, look how bright that is. And this is where I'm talking about before. You've heard me say a lot before, I don't like black paper for this reason. Look at how the white, it's just not that white. It's never going to be that bright. It appeared that way. There was an illusion that it was really bright, had high contrast up against the black. But once I actually pulled white on here and you could see the difference, it's huge. Now, on the other side, I do like black paper more now because I can use the touch-up texture titanium white. That just solved that problem for me. So if something just, I can't get it bright enough with the pencils because that paper is so dark, here's my solution. Lighten up whatever I want, and you'll see me do this with the eye. I'm going to put a lot of white in that eye and then go on top of it with my orange, and that's going to brighten it right up. This product has definitely turned into a must-have for me personally. I cannot even imagine working in colored pencil without it. And I always have people ask, can I just use acrylic paint or a gel pen? A lot of people use gel pens for highlights on colored pencil. I don't recommend it because you end up with archival problems. That's not intended to go on top of colored pencil. So I've seen a lot of people have problems where it smudges and flakes off, and you know, we're back to archival issues there. Whereas this is a product that is made for colored pencil. The only real drawback to this product is that it is not flexible. So if you use it like on this, I can't roll this up and ship it to somebody, which is typically the least expensive way to ship if I have to ship something internationally. In the US, I would always mat it and ship it flat, so it's no big deal. But for shipping internationally, because to cut down on the cost of shipping, I will usually put things in a tube, and I can't do that with this. This is not flexible. I don't want it to crack and flake off, so you want to keep it flat all the time. I'm just using a really light hand. Remember, when using a liner brush, if you push harder, you're going to get a thicker line. If you barely let the tip of the bristles touch, you'll get the much thinner line. Now when you mix this, don't mix a lot. Mix a small amount because it dries really quickly. And I even had Aliona tell me, well, tell people just to put it inside of a sealed container where you've got an airtight lid. That doesn't work so well because it dries while I'm using it. It's dry before I even have a chance to put the lid on. So the lid being on it doesn't serve me much purpose. So, I mean, you can keep it wet a little bit longer that way, but not much. I just prefer to mix a very, very small amount and then rinse out my container and reuse it when I need more. And I had to make 2 batches to cover all of his face and feathers that I'm working on here. And I have a video showing you exactly how I'm making this mixture. I'll put a link to that in the description as well. But just so you guys know, I don't get any sort of commission for selling this. I'm not trying to sell products to you for the sake of selling products. I'm just sharing what I personally like. And this is so nice for when you're painting fur, for creating clumps in the fur, anything like that. This is like the little wispy hairs inside wolf or dog ears, cat ears, any animal ears really, where you've got those little hairs. This makes it so much easier. That was always something that I fought with on my colored pencil work. It was like, oh, not the ears, those little lines. But it's so easy to do now. It gives me the look that I'm looking for. It's not that I was terribly unhappy with what I accomplished before. I just like it with this method and this look for creating those little white lines on top of things when painting fur, doing the inside of ears. So much better. If you've not used the liner brush, it does take a little bit of getting used to. And I do recommend get brushes that have the long bristles like what I have here. You don't want the really short bristles. You'll think that you're going to get finer lines. You won't. You're going to get the finest lines with a brush like this. The bristles are thin, but they're very long. If the bristles are very short, you end up with too much of whatever product you're using, paint, or in this case with the touch-up texture titanium white. It builds up right near the handle and it causes the bristles to splay. You also can't make nice long brush strokes because you can't load very much on a short bristled brush. Here I can have the bristles really loaded so I can make long, even, smooth brush strokes. That would pretty much be impossible with the small ones. Remember with this, it's mixed with touch-up texture, which means I'm going to be able to put any color I want on top of this, and I'm adding tooth back to the paper anywhere where I make these lines. You do want to make sure you let it dry completely though, and I would say at least 10 minutes, maybe longer. Let it really dry because it'll feel dry to the touch, but you'll go on top with the colored pencil and it can sometimes chip or flake a little bit or smear because it's not really as dry as it should be. Make sure you really let that dry before you go on top of it with your pencils. The fine lines I'm able to get with this are great. Again, using a liner brush, it can take a little bit of practice. If you want to practice, I would get a scratch piece of paper and some cheap acrylic paint and mix it with a little bit of water. Use that to practice. I wouldn't practice with this product. I think that would get too expensive. But the cheapest acrylic you can find, acrylic paint on paper, would give you a good handle of how this should feel and how you would get thin lines. But I think that would save you some money versus just jumping into learning lines with this if you're not used to painting. So a lot of what I'm doing here when I get to these shorter feathers are little teeny tiny dots mixed in with some of the actual brush strokes. What I will usually do with this on the brush, and you're not really seeing this on camera, well, you're definitely not seeing it on camera, is that I touch, usually after I reload the brush with this product, I touch it a little bit onto the front of my easel just to knock some of it off so I don't end up with too big of a blob on the paper itself. Here I'm making little dots and little lines for the area that I want to brighten up on the eye, and then when this dries I can go over it with the brighter orange. Now, if I had an eye where I wanted a very strong shine on the eye, I would use this for the dots, the brightest dots of the highlight on that eye. Here, I just wanted the highlight to be very, very subtle, so I did not use it. Not for that. Now look at putting that highlight, that white on the beak. Look how it made the beak feel more three-dimensional. It pulled it forward. Using an opaque color like this on your work, your opaque areas, your very bright whites like that, that's going to pull that area forward. So just keep that in mind. So I don't want to put super, super bright whites on the outside edges of outside feathers where that would make them feel closer to the viewer. The brightest, brightest white there, you can, again, that beak is a great example of how that really pulled that forward. And I just use water to rinse my brush when I'm finished. I'll use water as well to rinse out the cup where I've made my mixture of the titanium white touch-up texture. Lots of little details here. And that's a great example of what I just did there on the eye. Those little dots, that is not something that would have shown up very well with colored pencil, no matter which pencils I use. And I don't want to make it sound like you can't complete great detailed work in colored pencil without this product. You obviously can. People, we've all been doing it for years. Lots of artists do. But this sure does make it a lot easier. So I don't want you to think if you don't have this, you can't work on a project like this. You can. It's much easier though on white paper where you can let the white of the paper show through in that case. At least if you want things this bright. Taking that black pencil now. That one is in a Derwent pencil extender. Those ones, it comes in as a two-pack. You've got the black one that holds your polychromos or pencils that width, and then you have, or diameter, I should say, and then the silver one should hold your Luminance. Now, I have gotten a set before because I ordered a bunch of them at one time, and some of them did not hold pencils at all that they should have. If you have that happen, return it to where you bought it because that's not right. They should hold your polychromos and your Luminance. But most of the sets I got, I've not had any problems with. It was just that one. But I've heard from a few people saying they couldn't find any pencil extenders and that they had tried these. Well, then they probably got a bad batch like I did the one time. Just go ahead and return that for another set. They should fit your polychromos and Luminance. So I'm blending that with a softer gray color. Getting some little details in between these. And there I can go on top with the orange. And I'm using my polychromos because that one's more translucent there. Just brightening it up. And I just could not get it quite as bright as I wanted until I added the touch-up texture titanium white mixture first. I need an easier name for that. We should make something up. But once I added that, then I was able to get the orange to really, really stand out. Again, make sure you let it dry all the way before you do that, though. And this is a stage where I've pretty much put my reference photo away and I'm just focusing on tiny details that I think will make my piece look better. Here I'm going over a lot of the areas where I went too white, and I could just go right over everything, and I'm essentially creating a glaze, tinting the color. You can still see the details I made from the white with the touch-up texture titanium white mixture underneath, or any other brush strokes really that or pencil strokes I had made earlier. What I'm doing is just very lightly going over with that pencil and tinting the color, toning it down. So it lets me have the detail, lets me have the brightness without leaving everything straight white. That was a question that I had during the live stream. Somebody had wanted to know if you could mix this with other colored pencils to make, or make your own kind of powder and make your own colored pencil mixture that way. You really don't need to. I'm not sure that that would work anyway, because this stuff is very powdery, so it blends in a way that regular colored pencil, when you shave them down, they're very waxy or oily. So I don't think it would work well anyway. But even if it did, that would be a lot of work. And with this, all I have to do is put white where I know I'm going to want to color. When it dries, I can put orange, red, blue, whatever I want on top of it. So I still do have other colors with just using white. The white just makes it opaque so that the other color will stick to it on right on top. So don't feel like if you use this for any given area that you're stuck with white. You're not. You can put whatever you want on top of it. I'm taking that orange or kind of pumpkin color and going over a lot of this too for where I want to darken it. But look how much you're able to still see through that. You can still see all of those details and lines right underneath that I had previously done with the white. I ended up pulling this orange and a little bit of a kind of brick red color throughout a lot of this guy too, just to brighten up some of the colors, just because it seemed so gray. Now, in using this paper, I think one color or one set of colors I would probably personally avoid is any project that has a ton of yellow. That yellow, even if you put it over if you make the white first, the yellow is going to have a tendency to kind of gray up because of the black underneath. It's going to be very, very difficult to make anything with yellow. So let's say you're doing a set of flowers or something like that. It's going to be very difficult not to end up having that yellow turn into that muddy green gray color. So that might be something I would suggest possibly avoiding when working on black paper, or at least test it out and see if it's a result that you like before you start a full project with that. Now, of course, you can do the touch-up texture titanium white mixture first and then put the yellow on top, but if it's a large area, that's probably not going to be so practical. So just something to keep in mind. Here, the only two projects I've done, and I have liked them both a lot, but they both were colors that were very neutral. Browns, grays, tans, oranges, stuff that look okay up against black. So if the black mixes in or the brown or even orange isn't too bright, it's okay on this. It doesn't look weird. But with certain colors, yellows, blues, that you're going to get a very different result. So I would do some test samples with different colors first, so that'll give you a better idea, I think, of choosing what subject you want to work with or work on for a paper like this. And there we go, working off camera, because that's how you know my videos are complete. And that is pretty much it for this guy. This paper did actually photograph very well. I was kind of surprised. I was expecting to have a little bit more of a glare. As you can see here, the way the light is hitting the top of the paper, you've got that bright, bright light. And I was a little bit worried about that. But when taking photos indoors where I normally take my other photos, I didn't have a hard time coming up with even coverage of the black. I didn't have the lighter area and then the darker area because the paper is so matte. But it did photograph much better than I expected it to. You can see this long pause in between. I'll make a couple of pencil strokes, back away, make a couple of pencil strokes. When I get to the end like that, I'm constantly stopping and deciding if I want to adjust something. So that's why it's like one stroke, stop, two strokes, stop, one stroke again and stop, where I'm just trying to make those decisions as to what I want to change on my own, versus trying to copy exactly from the reference photo. So there is the finished work. And like I said, the black I think photographed very, very well. I've got nice even coverage. And yeah, that is it for next week. I am going to be trying out the golden airbrush paint. I've not used those before, so I'll be testing those and letting you guys know how those work on a quick flower project that I'm going to be actually giving to my mom for Mother's Day. But that one will be an acrylic with details, and you can actually do the same type of techniques I'll be using there besides the airbrush portion. You can do the techniques, and what I'm going to be talking about with the contrast and the color will apply to oils as well. So that is it. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and if you have any questions, let me know.